We are back. Ask the Doc in Santa Monica. Hey, Doc.
Hey.
Good to see you, my friend.
It's good to be back on the air again with you here, man.
No lunch today. We came on a different day.
I know,
Next time.
man. It's been brutal. Although I'm trying to get up a hill in France, so if I miss a meal, it's probably good for me right now.
Oh,
I told you that, right? We can talk about it.
That's awesome. Okay. All right, you got some good questions?
Yeah, the first one says, very simply, can Pregnenolone cause varicose veins? Interesting question, because I have no idea physiologically how it would. Pregnenolone is simply the first category off of cholesterol and that cascade of hormones, the steroid hormones. Generally categorized as pregnenolone, DHEA, progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen. Why it would cause a varicose vein, I can't even begin to try and explain physiologically. So it's kind of a tough one to say anything about, except no.
That's why they're asking, I guess, because people have wrong information. So
the conversion to maybe if it goes over to the corticosteroids rather than the what we call the sex steroids, the sex hormones, that's only going to help keep inflammation down, or guard the vessels, I guess, to say even progesterone. I don't know. I'm totally riffing here. I have no idea why it might cause varicose veins, which are typically a result of the valve gets blown out it should be a one-way valve, so that the blood goes in a circulatory fashion from everyone knows about the circulation, but so that it doesn't back up. It's got a one-way valve in the veins heading back to the heart, and if those valves break down, then you can have a backup, and the veins start to get engorged with blood, and they grow larger and larger, and they start to get tortuous, and they we call them varicose veins. They typically aren't a problem, but we can remove them. A good vascular surgeon will simply sort of splice, or sometimes it's just a sort of a side channel, and we don't necessarily need it, and the main flow or other flows are sufficient, so we can cut it out. Sometimes they can be more than simply unsightly, which is the reason why people get them removed. Sometimes they can be painful, but that's not usually the case. So again, I'm rambling here because I don't have a good answer, except for I don't know why pregnenolone will cause varicose veins.
Just at least people know now.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Doc. All right.
Next question says, truly a lot of knowledge here. I wish more people could hear him say that the fastest way to restart your test after Anavar or whatever is to simply do nothing at all. Just come off the Anavar, and your testes will get the signal to restart. And fast, right, Doc? This is funny because I just had a patient, I wonder if it's the same person, this week, I want to say yesterday, or over the weekend, ask me about this. And it's something I apparently said before. Have I talked about this before? Anyway.
You mentioned it.
Yeah, I mean, let me make it all clear, just so that people don't think this is the best way to do this. Certainly, if you stop taking testosterone or any other form of an androgen that would stop your endogenous production, whether it's Anavar or something else, your body is made to pick up on the lack of testosterone and accommodate and correct course by the pituitary sending a signal to the testicles to get producing again. So when I say it's the fastest way, it's not necessarily the fastest way, because certainly we have ways to smooth that transition before, if you have some warning, in other words, and you say, oh, okay, I want to come off, I don't know, March 1st, then here it is February 8th, we'll say, okay, well, let's put you on HCG in a dose sufficient to get your testicles working again. I refer to them as diesel engines. They're harder to get started than the pituitary I refer to as a gas engine, which as soon as the levels drop will send a signal. But the testicles might take a while to respond to that signal, okay? If we use HCG before we jump off of TRT or Anavar, in this case he's asking, then presumably we get those diesel engines started so that when they do get the signal, they're ready and will smooth that transition.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not necessary, and certainly the idea of what people call post-psychotherapy, meaning waiting until you come off to then use the ACG, to me, maybe that's what this question refers to, then yeah, I mean, your pituitary will step up to the plate.
It's more dramatic.
And send the signal, luteinizing hormone, which is, ACG is a homolog of that. There's LHCG receptors floating around. I guess you could argue that if you used enough HCG, you could maybe get the testicles to run faster than just, the natural production from the pituitary. But, at some point, there's, only so many receptors and you're just overdoing it. So, one of the fastest ways to get your testicles up and running is just letting the pituitary do its job. But there's a very big difference there, and this is the point I want to get across, and maybe this is what I'm assuming this gentleman is asking me about. Post-psychotherapy, in other words, waiting until you pull off of whatever it is you're using, it's you could argue 6 of one, half of the other, with some caveats in that obviously if estrogen is still elevated, we want to do something to lower the estrogen as well so that the luteinizing hormone will be produced by the pituitary. I guess that's a major caveat. But without having the testosterone on board, as a substrate from which the estrogen is made, well, then it's highly unlikely that would be the case. So again, a better version of coming off that would make it easier and faster than just going cold turkey or just doing post-psychotherapy would be knowing it's coming and starting the
preparation,
what we would call restarting the testicles, getting them recrudesced, maybe it would be a good word, beforehand.
Yeah, I like it. Thanks, Doc.
Yeah, so the third question asks, can I take IGF-1 if I have hypothyroidism? Question mark. Yeah, why not? Again, I'm having trouble. This is the second one tonight. I'm not sure where the question is going because IGF-1 is very different than, say, thyroid hormone. IGF-1 is made by the liver after being activated by growth hormone, and we're talking about a protein-based hormone rather than they're both protein-based. I beg your pardon, but the two, how would they be linked together? Their production is both initiated, if you will, thyroid and IGF-1 by a message from the pituitary. Again, it's more direct in some senses with the thyroid, although we go through T4 and T3 to finally get to free T3, and we get a growth hormone before we get to IGF-1. So again, I'm just sort of riffing here with elevations in GH, and maybe I'm missing the question here because maybe this person is referring to actually using exogenous IGF-1 rather than say exogenous GH or natural production of it.
Can you still buy that? I mean, can you still? I don't know if you can.
I don't know. I don't recommend it.
It used to be back in the day. I don't know.
I've seen, it offered at one point. I'd have to check to see with my pharmacies. I'm sorry I didn't get prepared enough for that. But apparently, the question, presumes you can get a hold of IGF-1, I guess. But, to me, taking IGF-1 without its precursor growth hormone doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, one thing I was talking about earlier today that might just shed some knowledge where I'm not apparently doing a good job here with the question, except to say, sure, is, most people think that people take human growth hormone when it comes to body composition to put on more muscle because the idea of growth, right? Mm-hmm. Growth with growth hormone, or it's, what eventually gets produced because of growth hormone and lasts a lot longer in the system and doesn't get the credit, by the way, but is, growth hormone, the growth in growth hormone reflects bone growth more than just about anything else in terms of importance when we're younger. It still helps other things grow, but more than anything for our age group, or let's say 26 years old and above, it really helps with fat loss. There's a receptor for growth hormone on, I believe, every fat cell that we have, and growth hormone will get the fat cells to release fatty acids, and drop fat is the bottom line. Mm-hmm. So most bodybuilders, whether they believe so or not, are getting their best effects of the use of growth hormone by leaning out. Mm-hmm. and that can happen for us too. So one contraindication, not a contraindication, but one thing you want to be careful of if you're using growth hormone or IGF-1 is the potential for increased blood sugar. Okay, that's one thing that maybe there's some confusion here. But so if you have diabetes, then you might want to make some adjustments, but it wouldn't necessarily be contraindicated. Again, I'm going way off track here from the question, so
but
I'll just stop there.
Yeah.
Can I take IGF-1 if I have hypothyroidism? I would think so, yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Doc.
Kept it rolling there.
Go ahead, Doc.
So this one says, I'm 21 years old and I want to do a 6-week cycle of Anavar, 50 milligrams, but I'm worried about not bouncing back, also known as not being able to produce my own testosterone. Well, that is a concern to be addressed for sure. And again, I'm speaking generally of any 21-year-old. As I've said before, it's generally accepted that somewhere around, when I was in school, it was 26, maybe it's 25 now, but up until that point, you haven't fully developed your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis yet. And so while we believe it's not hardwired anymore, it's more soft-wired, it still hasn't been developed yet. And there's the possibility that you would disturb the formation of that axis, and that's not a good thing. So there is some risk there that you would be, again, messing up your system. But I haven't seen that happen and not be able to be fixed yet in my career, if you will. It's got to happen, though, and you do run a risk. Now, the other thing is when you're disturbing that formation or its function, even no matter what, and at what point in life, the amount of, well, in this case, let's just stick with its formation, because that's what our concern is. By the time you're my age, you're not worried about the HPA axis being formed anymore. You're just worried about the function. So the potential for damage is a function of really more than anything, the chronicity of use. So how long you're on this, not necessarily the dose. And its effect on the function, I'd go back and say, well, that's also a function of age. And that's to do with, coming off of testosterone replacement or an anabolic and wondering how long it would take to restore your endogenous production. In this case, being on a cycle, he's calling it, for 6 weeks of Anavar, and the dose isn't really that important, but 50 milligrams is a hefty dose. Most likely would not affect you, but I can't say that for sure.
Right.
But I'm just saying, in keeping with the chronicity of use, in other words, versus, say, being on it for a couple of years, I've seen this before in my practice. You wouldn't believe it. Even in this country, but in a lot of other countries too, where it's much more easily accessed, I guess is the way I should say that, then people are getting on awfully early. And not to go too far afield here, but we don't publicize it that much because we'd rather not have unwanted children because of the lack of contraception. But the same issue occurs with females who get on birth control pills, which affects the same axis, prior to full development of that axis before age 26. You can look it up. We don't talk about it, but we've seen instances where girls get on birth control for whatever reason at 15, and then have troubles later because that development has been, affected by the exogenous use of these same types of hormones, all these, steroid hormones.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, I was going to add something else here. The odds that you'll bounce back if you did it would be pretty good. I can't think of anything else to add here, although,
It's always better to keep it shorter, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, I know what I was going to say, though. The problem with that is, and in my day, I'm in my 60th year now, guys did 6, maybe 8-week cycles, and that was a cycle.
Yeah.
The problem is, as we know now, a lot of times
12,
it doesn't sort of kick in
until
6 weeks, maybe 4 weeks in certain instances, but really 6 weeks. So what are you doing? What risk benefit do we have here? Something worth considering. Like, why would you want to do this if you're really not getting that much out of it?
Yeah.
Presumably either.
Yeah.
So I just want to throw that in there.
Yeah. Good point. Thanks, Doc.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay, this one seems like a long one. My story with testosterone started back in 2019 when I was super depressed and a whopping 145 nanograms per deciliter. I thought I was going to say pounds. I would start crying out of nowhere. Sex life was non-existent. Would get panic attacks, anxiety. Started TRT at 200 milligrams once every 2 weeks and was fine for 10 months until insomnia hit me like a truck and didn't sleep for 1 entire month and was desperate to find a solution. Stopped taking TRT, lost all my gains that I worked so hard to achieve, couldn't take it anymore as I didn't know when my insomnia would go away. Started taking, sorry, there's not any punctuation here, or as much. Started taking all kinds of pills to sleep over the counter. Prescription like Lunesta and Ambien gave the most horrible side effects until one day I finally found a solution all on my own. It was clonazepam. That's a benzodiazepine, very long acting, also goes by the brand Klonopin. After 6 months of finally getting some sleep, I decided to get back into TRT as some things were just not there. Even though my test was at 365 nanograms per deciliter at that moment, I still felt empty and with a cloudy head. Went again to an endocrinologist and wasted my time for an entire month as he did not want me to take any TRT and said that was like coffee. Went back to my urologist. I explained the situation to her. She was more than happy to see me feel better and was all in on me to start my treatment again. But this, I had done some extended research. Sorry, missing some words too. Which was to now split my injections into twice a week. And that's what I did now 6 months later. I'm at 1200 level, feeling super great. I can still sleep, and I think that was the best choice I ever made. 2 times a week on the shoulder with a 27 gauge needle in the morning. Okay. I also take 0.3, which is 60 milligrams for a total of 120 milligrams weekly. What are your thoughts on this, Doc? Okay. That was difficult for me. I don't know how we lost a lot of the punctuation, but we did, and I apologize. But so the issue here, though, is a couple things. I mean, first and foremost, you're feeling better. Let's start there.
Right.
And I don't see you doing anything that is far-fetched or crazy or harmful, except for one thing. There's a small group of people, roughly 15%, that can get away with using a benzodiazepine without having significant side effects, which usually end up being withdrawal effects, even if you're still taking the medication. So you accommodate to it, and that can lead to higher dosing, and then you feel better for a while, then you don't. You start having withdrawal symptoms again, even though you're still on it. I think, honestly, we're going to hear more about this than we ever heard about opioids and opiates one day.
Oh.
Yeah, it's there's a gal, Heather Ashton, who's now passed on, but in the UK, and she had a website, benzo.org/UK, I think, and she did a lot of research. Of course, you're going to read the worst cases on the internet, right? But still, even some of the not so or as bad cases sound pretty bad to me, and I've seen it in my career for sure, where because the side effects of withdrawal, for example, aren't as obvious as they are with opiates, where you've got a lot of physical symptoms. More of the symptoms are mental with benzodiazepine withdrawal. And again, I'm not just talking about stopping cold or trying to wean off. I'm talking about while you're taking it, again, your body gets used to it.
It's a sleep aid. It's a sleep to help
people
you sleep.
use it as a sleep aid. It's what we call an anxiolytic. So it's something that reduces the feelings of anxiety and can be very effective. If you've got anxiety and you take one of these, you're like, this is God's answer to anxiety for the time being, briefly. And a lot of people, again, use it for sleep. It's usually not to make you or help you fall asleep so much as help you stay asleep. It's for the type A's or the ruminators out there that, as soon as they can wake up and have enough energy to start worrying again. So the first 4 hours of sleep and they wake up and they go, okay, let's start ruminating. It's very effective for them for the sleep part. And there's back and forth still about how it affects the sleep architecture, whether it's negatively or not. It used to be they said, yeah, well, you think you're asleep, but it's affecting your different stages of sleep, and again, what we call our sleep architecture, such that it's really not a good thing, even though you think it is. Anyway, I can go on and on about that. That's not the nature of the question. But for this, I will add too that the Ambiens and the Lunestas are not a good idea either. Very addictive. Same type of situation can occur. They're all considered what we call Z drugs because they have a Z in them. In the generics anyway, I mean the generic names. And I don't recommend them except in case of emergencies, and that's it. But the TRT dosing here is very odd, but who cares? As long as it's working for this person, obviously a male, it's fine. It's a very small dose, 120 milligrams a week, typically doesn't bring benefit, and certainly even 200 milligrams every 2 weeks often doesn't bring benefit for the entire 2 weeks, I'll say. You'll have a peak and a trough, and during part of that 2 weeks, you go, oh, this is great, and then you'll be like, oh, God, and you kind of go on a roller coaster ride.
I thought in the end that he was taking one dosage split half every 3 days. And I've heard that like more and more recently. People talking about that. They're saying, they feel like it works better. Do you agree with that, or are you still... I know most people don't like to shoot themselves, so it's a lot easier just to do one injection a week. But let's say the person doesn't care, like some of your patients. Would you recommend for them to do it twice a week, every 3 days, or does it really matter or no?
I don't remember if we brought this up or not, but I bring it up very often in my office, certainly with my patients. The problem is, well, first of all, you already brought up, it's another stick or more. If it's biweekly, it's another stick. If it's every other day, it's 3.5 sticks a week.
But does it work better? Most people would like to do it once a week, but is there a benefit for them to do it less twice a week?
In my experience, typically it's no.
Okay, that's what I thought.
What I see is, more often than not, someone will come in and say, hey, doc, by the way, I read on Dr. Google, blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, why'd you do it? Well, like I said, it's going to smooth out my titer of testosterone. Okay, but really, why did you do it though? Well, because it's going to give me a more even level of testosterone. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Okay, but what's that doing for you? And typically, in other words, it wasn't because of any way they were feeling, not getting resolution of symptoms with the once a week injection. And typically, when I ask them, well, do you feel any better? The answer is no. They just think it's better for them because they read it on somebody's website or there's a theory behind it. And the problem is this. I fixed a few of those bad haircuts, and I think I've said this before, about 50% of the time, the wheels fall off the wagon. I had a very famous trainer who was taking this at a weekly dose, doing great. We reversed a lot of low T symptoms, and things were going really well. New life, new career, everything's really smoking really well. And I don't remember whatever the source was of his deciding to change, but he did. And he was going, I believe it was every other day. And the wheels fell off the wagon. Meaning all the resolution of symptoms went away. In other words, the low T was back where it was. I mean, erectile dysfunction, to be specific.
Wow.
The workouts started suffering. Body composition started suffering. And it wasn't because he changed his diet or anything else we could come up with.
Wow.
Eventually we got him back on the once a week dosing, which kind of made sense. Hey, what did you change? And we changed that back, and everything came back to its,
the way it was.
Wonderful state, having, resolved the symptoms. I am only riffing here, guessing. Who knows why? We don't have any studies that show why it might make a difference, but just one. I mean, if we're going to go bro science, I can give you something that might make sense, that at least physiologically does make some sense. Just like with, for example, IV nutrition, where we're using in a Myers cocktail, say, a large supply, or larger than you could absorb all at once, say, with your GI tract, of magnesium, certainly magnesium, maybe the B vitamins. The blood titer goes higher, and therefore, just with some of the basics, okay, of transport into the cell, you're going to have, if you use a gradient even, you're going to see more of those go into the cell than if you absorbed them by mouth. Certainly more into the blood, right? That's a given. But more might go into the cell that way with, in this case, with the testosterone being spiked a higher titer at one point during the week with the once weekly dosing than the other way. And that might be a benefit to us, just like, when we're doing NAD, or like I said, a Myers cocktail and the B vitamins and magnesium, that spike might have some benefit. We know it does something differently, oral NAD, for example, versus IV NAD. Why wouldn't it be different, with the spike with testosterone? I don't know. I'm just riffing, but at least I have something physiological, medically speaking, that might.
I'm glad that this guy asked this question, because I've been hearing that lately. And I just wanted to ask you also personally, so I'm glad you said that. I know you said it to me before, and you said, why complicate it? Just do once a week. It's much easier, simpler, but now if there's no benefit of doing it more than that, why would you, right?
Well, but that said, if you have issues with your current dose, I asked somebody, why'd you do it? Well, I felt like I was on a roller coaster ride, Doc. I felt like day 2.5, 3 after my shot, when I know the titers are peaking, now that you told me, because, hopefully I blew that because I didn't want the placebo effect to be even considered. But before they knew, in other words, the pharmacokinetics of testosterone, they would tell me, on the day 3, I would feel a real charge of energy, and then by the time my next shot came around, I could feel the difference. Well, that's a good reason, because we're treating the patient here, right? Mm-hmm. And we're treating your symptoms. So sometimes it is a good idea. Someone divides the dose just into biweekly is typically all that's needed. And I don't have that rush of, almost mania, let's say, with the high testosterone levels, and I don't have as much of a dive coming into my next shot. And that makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, to use another example, people say, well, I know that I could probably use less anastrozole that way if they're going to use an AI, or if they're going to use a SERM. We'll talk about the SERM. But then, I just ask them, well, why do you care? They're just agents to help us adjust those levels. If you take 0.5 milligram instead of 1 milligram the day after your shot, is it that important? Yeah. I don't see it medically, but again, I'm a registered libertarian. If they want to do it, great. But it is an invasive procedure, an injection. So I know you go, well, come on, it's just an injection. Well,
some people don't like it.
Sometimes it goes wrong. We all know that happens, right? You get a little infection or a mouse because of it. It's that much more opportunity to disrupt the tissue and get a mouse. If that's a good enough reason for a lot of us, including me. Anyway, so back to his question, which I think is, or I guess he's asking me for comments, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this, Doc? It seems like a fairly light dose, because again, he says, I also take 0.3, which is 60 milligrams for a total of 120 milligrams weekly. Again, if it works, great. If you're not satisfied, consider using more, because in my experience, 120 milligrams weekly of T-SIP or, anything. I mean, if it was T-PROP, even worse, but, T-SIP or T-enanthate, then you might even feel better. 1200 level, doesn't tell me anything because, again, guys, it depends upon when you did your last injection versus when you draw blood for those laboratory assays. It could peak on day 2.5 and be, 3,000, and then, right before your next injection be down to, say, 800. So this doesn't really give me enough to go on, except, like I'm going to repeat last time I promised, what's most important is he says he's feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then we may not have to adjust anything. It might be fine, but I'm just kind of giving you some parameters for the general population that I've noticed.
I like it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Doc.
That's it. Question here says, how quickly does your testosterone drop when you stop? 3 weeks or sooner? Good question. The testosterone form is important. If it's an ester of testosterone, each ester has a different half-life, we call it. The half-life sounds like a time period, but it's actually a rate of metabolism. And that confuses a lot of people. But it's easy to put this way. If something has let's say a 3-day half-life, then that means that half of it is metabolized in 3 days. Then, in the next 3 days, half of what's left then is metabolized, and so on. So every 3 days, half of that is typically metabolized. And then you get into things like terminal half-life, which depends on the substance, and certain things. But generally speaking, very, very generally, it might be like a 5x of your half-life. But I'm getting way afield of this and not necessary to go through. But the concept is, the rate at which it gets metabolized. That's very important to know what's left. And we have these different half-lives that range. I mean, in this country, propionate, we'll say roughly 3 days. Enanthate 7, cypionate 8, and of course it all depends on what study you read. We have an undecanoate, which is so hard to get, it's not even worth talking about. But 3 to 4 weeks, I think, is the half-life. I'd have to double check, but so that definitely determines how soon your testosterone will drop, in addition to how much you inject, right? Because if I inject 2 cc's of something with a half-life of 8 days, I might get to here where, and out to here, rather than if it's 1 cc, I might get to here and only out to here. Mm-hmm. All these things come into play. So what I can answer, though, that might be of value is, how quickly does your testosterone typically drop if you're using testosterone cypionate or enanthate, which is a typical TRT drug, and with a typical dose of, let's call it 1 cc a week? Well, a week is typically when, that's why we're dosing it this way, so you don't drop below that therapeutic minimum, right? Has nothing to do, well, I shouldn't say nothing, just because, the 7-day half-life of enanthate happens to match a weekly dosing pattern. That's just coincidence. Okay, so let's not get lost in that. But what I have found is that when people get off of TRT, cold turkey will just stop, the testosterone drops way sooner than when they actually feel like the wheels fall off the wagon. Some people will say, after they haven't done their shot, after say 10 days from the last shot, they'll say, oh, I can feel it, and I believe them. But then somewhere around 3 weeks is when they go, oh my God, that's when I really felt the exhaustion, the lack of libido, et cetera, et cetera. So just sort of a fun fact that I hope is helpful.
Not so fun, but yeah. Thanks, Doc.
The last one for today says, best supps to raise my 74-year-old dad's testosterone and vitality without TRT, ? I have also put him on CJC 1295, ipamorelin, 100 micrograms twice daily, and 500 milligrams twice daily metformin to raise IGF-1, and flip genetic longevity switches on while avoiding downregulating insulin sensitivity. Huge thanks, guys. Agreed, Doc? Boy, I wish I could do better with this, but it's going to be hard. I'm sorry. So let's just start with it one by one. raising dad's TRT or testosterone without TRT. Well, we could probably get some rise. I'm just going to answer technically. Get some rise in testosterone without testosterone replacement, exogenous testosterone, using some of the old tricks for secondary hypogonadism, like I would prefer enclomiphene, not clomiphene. So one of the isomers of clomiphene citrate. So not including zuclomiphene. We talked about this before, I think, right? So, but the problem with that is it probably will not affect the second part of the question, the vitality, because after somewhere around age 30, what I found in practice is treating secondary hypogonadism often isn't as successful, let's put it that way, as it could be, if at all. And I can't tell you why, because a lot of times we even see the levels go up, and yet it might only last for 6 months to 2 years, and with the same testosterone levels that we brought up from the depths, if you will, successfully treating secondary hypogonadism, the numbers are the same, but the treatment is no longer working. The patient says, I see the numbers, doc, but I'm telling you, I got all the symptoms again. So I can't explain that, sorry. I hope we get I'll keep digging, but I can't explain that now. So for a 74-year-old male, the likelihood that we're going to see any benefits are probably none, but maybe a smidgen of slim in there somewhere. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But so I'm sorry I can't give you any help there. The CJC ipamorelin might be helpful to him, and the only way to check would be really to see what his IGF-1 is after using this for a while. Everyone's different in terms of how they're going to react to the stimulation and the potential to recrudesce the pituitary gland, so it makes more growth hormone. But the only way we could see is to try and see what happens and test to see. And that might give him some sense of more vitality, but it's not gonna raise his testosterone levels. I'm not clear on the metformin here, because first of all, I don't have a dose. Oh no, I do. I'm sorry. 500 milligrams of metformin twice a day. I don't know how this is going to raise IGF-1, but it should improve insulin sensitivity. So the insulin levels, fasting insulin, should drop, okay? And that's a good thing. In terms of flipping on genetic longevity switches, I'm not sure what that means in medical terms, but I will say this, that, and maybe what he's getting at is that there's been several studies that correlate lower IGF-1 with longevity. But the problem is we're correlating. We don't have a mechanism. I mean, we have proposed mechanisms and all that stuff, and we have some other data that conflicts with this. Okay? So I wouldn't necessarily strive for low IGF-1. I would, however, strive to use metformin, because we have a lot of evidence, and we're about to hopefully complete a TAME study. I think it's fully funded now, so we're just waiting for it to start, but we'll see. Anyway, Niles Barzilay is heading that one up, and he's a very, very, very smart doctor and anti-aging specialist. With metformin, there's all kinds of stuff we do. I won't get into the weeds with activating AMPK, etc. But we have found it helps with activating autophagy, which is, I think, one of the things he might be referring to here in terms of, the longevity switches, turning off mTOR, which would make a bodybuilder upset, actually. But anyway, we're talking about longevity, and that one's a good one. We know that cancer loves sugar, so keeping blood sugar low. The only thing I would say here is at some point, all these things that we keep finding out about, we start making rules out of them, like this IGF-1 rule. One size does not fit all, and I would exercise caution in applying this to anyone just blanketly, because if you've got a very frail 74-year-old, okay, who's otherwise very, very healthy, you may actually want to raise IGF-1 and growth hormone. because, whatever it is, second, third leading cause of death, accidental deaths, and, first or second on the list is, a fall. You might not want to be frail, in other words. And so boosting your IGF-1 is good. Boosting your mTOR is good, so you get more muscle growth. And just, maybe he's beat up and could use some of the regenerative potential of mTOR, and he's not so concerned right now about autophagy and these genetic longevity switches. And there's a lot of begging of the question that goes on here with some of these discoveries, and applying it to, and this is the danger, you're applying it to that average person that doesn't exist. There's no such thing as the average person. Mm-hmm. It's a concept, right? Mm-hmm. So again, to be careful, you want to, maybe you do want to activate growth hormone, maybe you don't. And maybe you do it for a while, maybe you don't. It might be a waste of time. We don't know yet. Mm-hmm. If your, what we call hemoglobin A1C is 4.6, that's very relatively low. So your blood sugar on average is very low, okay? Maybe metformin is a complete waste of time. If blood sugar is the only mechanism and its regulation therefrom with these different things I mentioned, like AMPK, or not absorbing through the intestine as much, not creating as much from the liver, maybe you don't waste your time with metformin, you focus on something else. Maybe there's something particular about the mechanisms of lowering sugar, though, that are great for you, whether it's using metformin or berberine or gynostemma. These are questions we don't have answered yet. So, again, I'm just saying all this not to be Byzantine or to stir up a bunch of stuff and people go, what the heck is he talking about? Just be careful how you apply some of this stuff to, take into account each individual circumstances.
Got it.
And one last thing, for example, just to drive it home, something that everyone will understand. I definitely don't want to increase growth hormone using CJC and ipamorelin in someone who has extant cancer, even if it's something as simple as skin cancer. When I say simple, that's an organ that's got a cancer to it that can lead to death through melanoma. So just making it simple. That's why you got to take it, case by case.
Yes. Yeah, good advice. Thanks, Doc.